So imagine you are just, a young woman visiting a friend's house.
Right, just a totally normal day.
Yeah, exactly. You're just stopping by for a casual visit, maybe having a cup of coffee, catching up on the week.
Nothing out of the ordinary.
Right. And at some point, you excuse yourself to use the bathroom. You walk in, you close the door, and when you open the lid of the toilet, you spot something really strange.
Something that totally disrupts that whole feeling of safety, right?
Oh, completely. Down in the bowl, just, resting in the water, are two small, gleaming gold objects.
And at first, your brain probably tries to rationalize it.
Yeah, at first glance, they just look like beads. Maybe a broken necklace or a piece of costume jewelry that accidentally fell in.
You're just trying to make it fit into a normal context.
Exactly. So you lean down to get a better look, really trying to process what you're actually seeing. And then, the horrifying realization just sets in.
Because they aren't beads.
No. They are two solid gold dental crowns, human teeth, just floating in a toilet bowl in your friend's house.
Yeah, finding human remains in such a banal, everyday setting, it forces this complete cognitive dissonance.
It really does.
The brain just struggles to bridge the gap between, a friend's guest bathroom and literal forensic evidence.
In that collision, that specific collision between the mundane and the macabre, that's the whole epicenter of today's deep dive.
This is a heavy one today.
It is. We are traveling back to a truly chilling 1988 murder case from the city of Tours, France.
Case that really shook the region.
Yeah. We're unpacking the tragic fate of a 38-year-old woman named Francois Gandrron. Her dismembered remains were actually discovered discarded in these blue hospital trash bags.
They're looking through our stack of sources for this one. The police files, the forensic reports, the witness statements. It's wild.
Wild is the word.
This case is basically a masterclass in behavioral contradiction. It completely tests the limits of criminal profiling, specifically regarding, how intimacy can literally be weaponized.
So our mission today is to sort of guide you through this whole labyrinth.
There are a lot of twists.
So many twists. We will dissect the bizarre initial clues and navigate this really complex web of situational red herrings.
Oh, the red herrings in this one are unbelievable. Boyfriends, local businessmen.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll take a hard look at the psychology of a really suffocating friendship.
Which is the core of it all.
Right. And ultimately, we're going to break down exactly how those two gold objects floating in a toilet bowl ended up unraveling a practically flawless crime.
It's just incredible how one tiny mistake ruins everything.
It is. So to you listening, I want you to ask yourself how well you really know your closest friends.
The people you think you know everything about.
Yeah, the people you text every single day. The ones who literally have a key to your house.
It's a scary thought.
Because in this deep dive, intimacy is not some protective barrier. Intimacy becomes the literal blueprint for a brutal betrayal.
It's the weapon itself.
Right. So let's unpack the dynamic that started all of this. We really have to look at Francois Gandrron and her lifelong best friend, Sylvie Rivero.
Yeah, examining their dynamic is totally crucial because it forms the psychological engine of the entire crime.
They go way back, right?
Oh, way back. These two women had known each other since childhood. But by 1988, as adults, their lives had converged at this very specific, really precarious intersection.
Because they were both recently divorced.
Exactly. They find themselves navigating this sort of secondary adolescence at the exact same time.
But for Francois, the sources make it clear the circumstances are incredibly liberating.
Right, her situation was a bit different.
Yeah, her 19-year-old son had actually recently moved out of the house. So she's 38, she suddenly has an empty nest, and she is just seizing this new freedom with both hands.
She's really stepping into her own.
Totally. She is highly extroverted, very sociable, and she absolutely loves the nightlife in Tours. She has this vast spinning circle of friends.
Which is great for her, but then you have Sylvie. Sylvie represents the stark opposite end of the temperamental spectrum.
She was super introverted.
Yeah, highly introverted. She completely lacks that natural magnetic pull that Francois possesses. And she just doesn't have the intrinsic desire to navigate crowded social spaces on her own.
But despite that, they were practically joined at the hip.
Yeah, yet in the wake of their divorces, these two were spending almost every single night together.
Which, that brings a very specific power dynamic into play. We see this often, this sort of, I call it a social vampire dynamic.
A social vampire, I like that.
And I don't mean that necessarily in a malicious way, it's just, You know, when an introvert entirely outsources their social life to an extrovert friend.
Right, they let the other person do all the heavy lifting.
Exactly. The introvert doesn't do the work of making plans, absorbing the social friction, or maintaining the conversational flow. They just sort of attach themselves to the extrovert's slipstream and enjoy the ride.
That's a great way to put it.
But it makes me wonder what actually happens when the person holding all the social power in a friendship just decides to pull the plug.
Well, you see a complete collapse of the dependent person's social infrastructure.
It just crumbles.
Completely. The psychological literature frequently refers to this as a form of enmeshment.
Okay, enmeshment.
Yeah, and we usually apply that term to family systems, like parents and children with blurred boundaries. But it manifests virulently in adult friendships when traditional family structures just dissolve.
Which is exactly what happened here. Both women are divorced. Francois' son is gone.
Exactly. They are basically floating in this transitional void and have latched onto each other to form a primary unit.
So they were each other's whole world, basically.
Well, for Sylvie, absolutely. Sylvie isn't just hanging out with Francois. She is relying on Francois for her entire connection to the outside world.
Wow. Okay, so let's see how that enmeshment shatters in real time.
It happens fast.
It does. It's the night of December 11th, 1988, and they're at a nightclub in Tours. Francois and Sylvie are out together, hanging out with two men from their wider social circle, Michel and Luc.
Just a standard night out for them.
Right. The music is playing, drinks are flowing, but suddenly, Francois decides she wants out. She actually pulls Sylvie aside in the bathroom and says she's getting a weird vibe from the men.
And you really have to notice Sylvie's reaction here.
Because it wasn't just, oh, okay, let's go.
No, it isn't mild disappointment. She is deeply, vocally frustrated. She points out they socialize with Michel and Luc frequently without any issue.
So she's pushing back hard.
Right. From Sylvie's perspective, this sudden desire to leave is this arbitrary disruption of her only social outlet.
But Francois just won't budge. They go back to the table. Michel is paying the tab, asking where they should go next, and Francois completely shuts it down.
She's done for the night.
She grabs her coat, but she doesn't tell the men they're creeping her out. She lies. She tells them she has to go home because her boyfriend is probably waiting for her at her apartment.
Which creates a really awkward situation at the table.
Totally. The men are confused, maybe a bit offended, but Francois just insists, gives Sylvie a hug, and flees the club alone in a cab.
And when Francois sorts her independence and leaves that club, she is actively fracturing Sylvie's reliance on her.
It's like cutting the cord.
Exactly. For Sylvie, the extrovert is basically turning off the life support.
Wow.
Yeah, the anger she felt at that table was this early warning sign of a dangerous, possessive resentment. It is the panic of someone realizing they have zero control over their sole source of social sustenance.
But the wild thing is, the lie Francois told at the club, using her boyfriend as a shield to escape, it wasn't entirely a fabrication.
No, it wasn't.
Her boyfriend really was waiting for her. And using a real person as a fake excuse means reality is waiting for her when you get home.
And the domestic friction that follows perfectly illustrates how these everyday conflicts can unintentionally muddy a future investigation.
So let's move to the morning after. December 12th, 8:00 a.m. Francois wakes up in her apartment. Her boyfriend, a young man named Yves Marda, is getting dressed, and the atmosphere is just incredibly tense.
He had been waiting at her apartment for hours the night before.
Yeah, and according to the sources, this was actually a chronic issue for the couple.
It was a major point of contention. Eve consistently felt that Francois prioritized her vast circle of friends, particularly her male friends, over him.
Which makes sense given their schedules, right?
Yeah, he worked traditional daytime hours, making evenings their primary window to connect. Francois, however, was perpetually out late, fully immersed in her post-divorce freedom.
So it's a classic clash of lifestyles. She's hungover, he's furious. So to diffuse the situation, Francois extends a peace offering.
She tries to smooth things over.
Right. She invites Eve to come back that night after work. She promises she will definitely be home and they can cook dinner, just the two of them.
And Eve accepts the olive branch. He relaxes, he smiles, and they reconcile.
Just a normal relationship moment.
Exactly. A classic pattern of domestic de-escalation. The promise of an intimate evening to patch a recurring grievance.
And during this morning chat, Francois also mentions that a handyman named Christian Marrow is coming by that morning to drop off and install some new wallpaper.
So she's implying she'll be home for most of the day anyway.
Yeah, Eve heads to work, totally satisfied with the plan.
So the stage is set for the reconciliation dinner.
Yeah.
But as we know, the evening takes a really severe turn.
It really does. Eve finishes work and heads back to Francois' apartment. He has a spare key, so he just lets himself in. But the apartment is completely empty.
She's not there.
Nowhere to be found. He assumes she's just running late, so he makes himself some dinner and waits. Then, right at 8:00 p.m., the landline rings.
And this is where everything shifts.
Eve answers it. The person on the other end is an anonymous woman. She claims to be a quote-unquote friend of Francois, and she tells Eve that Francois decided at the very last minute to go out of town for the weekend with some other people. She basically says she won't be coming home tonight.
Just imagine the psychological whiplash Eve experiences in that moment.
Oh, it must have been infuriating.
The peace offering from that morning is instantly obliterated.
So in a fit of sheer frustrated rage, Eve takes the dinner plate he'd been eating from and just smashes it against the kitchen floor.
A total outburst.
He shatters the plate, storms right out of the apartment, and goes back to the home he shares with his mother.
And this is a textbook example of a situational red herring.
It really is.
These emotionally messy domestic moments inadvertently create massive hurdles for investigators later on.
I mean, I have to put my detective hat on for a second and push back on how this looks. If I am Inspector Barbier walking into this case a few days later, Eve looks like the absolute perfect suspect.
Oh, on paper, he looks incredibly guilty.
Right. Think about the profile. He's the jealous boyfriend with a documented history of arguing over her socializing with other men. He is alone in her apartment. He literally smashes plates in a violent rage on the exact night she disappears.
It's all there.
Isn't this the exact statistical profile of a domestic homicide perpetrator?
It is, and that's why you are looking at a classic false crime scene. Life's normal emotional outbursts, a shattered plate, scattered food, they accidentally mimic the signs of a violent struggle.
So the police walk in and think a fight happened.
Exactly. It creates a gravitational pull for detectives, drawing them toward the statistically likely suspect. But the absolute genius of this specific setup isn't just the smashed plate.
It's the phone call.
It's the phone call at 8:00 p.m.
The anonymous friend calling to cancel the date.
That call was a highly calculated tactical maneuver. The caller, who we know is the killer, knew Francois, was already dead by 8:00 p.m.
Which is just chilling to think about.
It is. But they also intimately understood Francois' habits, her unreliability, and the specific friction it caused in her romantic relationship.
So they used that against him.
They completely weaponized Francois' known behavior against Eve to buy time. They knew that if Eve received a call saying Francois flaked on him yet again, his reaction would be anger, not alarm.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
He would just leave in a huff rather than, calling the police to report her missing. It's a brilliant piece of psychological manipulation.
Wow. So Eve is just fuming in an empty apartment, feeling sorry for himself, completely unaware that his girlfriend's fate is actually already sealed.
He had no idea.
The brutal reality of her absence doesn't even come to light until the following morning, December 13th, 11:00 a.m.
This is the exact moment the narrative violently shifts from a missing person case to a major homicide investigation.
Yeah, we are at the Trousseau Hospital in Tours.
Yeah.
A janitor is just doing his standard rounds, taking trash out to the main dumpster in the parking lot.
It's just another Tuesday for him.
Right, but he notices something completely out of place. There are two blue trash bags sitting on a grassy strip right in the middle of the lot.
And the color is so important here.
Yeah, this catches his eye specifically because the hospital exclusively uses gray trash bags.
That color discrepancy is a really vital data point.
Why is that?
It immediately signals to the hospital staff that this material didn't originate from a surgical ward or an internal hospital department.
Oh,
It was absolutely imported from the outside.
But it's totally foreign to the hospital.
Exactly.
So the janitor walks over to the blue bags. He notices they're really heavy, super bulky. He opens one up, and the moment he registers what is inside, he just stumbles backward, turns, and sprints back into the hospital, shouting for the police.
It's just a horrific discovery.
Chief Inspector Francois Barbier of the Tours Police Department arrives shortly after. He walks out to the grassy strip, kneels down, and opens the first bag.
And what does he find?
Inside, he finds two severed arms and the lower parts of two legs. He opens the second bag and finds a woman's torso. Missing from the remains are the pelvis, the thighs, and the head.
And the logistics of this dump site are just incredibly tight.
How tight are we talking?
Well, the janitor confirms he performed his initial rounds at 9:00 a.m., and the bags were totally absent.
Okay.
And then he discovers them at 11:00 a.m. So the killer transported and discarded dismembered human remains in a bustling public hospital parking lot in broad daylight within a 2-hour window.
That is so brazen. Barbier actually initially wonders if this is just some morbid prank, by medical students from a nearby university.
Like maybe a stolen cadaver or something.
Yeah, exactly. But the mutilation is just too crude, it's too severe. He knows this is a homicide.
There's no mistaking it.
But without a head and with no immediate fingerprint matches hitting the database, he is staring at this biological puzzle with literally no identity.
And that lack of identification just freezes the investigation in its tracks.
They can't move forward?
Not at all. It isn't until December 17th, when Barbier receives the full autopsy report, that the case really gains momentum. But the medical examiner's findings present a massive psychological contradiction.
Yeah, let's dive into this autopsy, because the methodology makes zero sense on the surface.
It really doesn't.
The medical examiner determines the victim died on December 12th, which is the day before the bags were actually found.
Okay.
The cause of death is exsanguination, deep gashes to the wrists, causing her to basically bleed out. Furthermore, toxicology reveals high concentrations of an anti-anxiety medication in her system.
Which tells us a lot about the state she was in.
Yeah, she was heavily sedated, likely entirely unconscious, before the fatal cuts were even administered.
This specific sequence of events raises profound questions about the offender's profile and their physical capabilities.
Because it's like reading two completely disparate profiles for the exact same offender.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have a murder method that is passive, controlled, almost gentle. Drugging someone and letting them quietly bleed out is very clinical.
Right.
But the post-mortem treatment, the dismemberment, is exceptionally violent, it's messy, and physically taxing. It's the work of a butcher.
The huge contrast.
So does this indicate an offender who is physically weak, or someone who is just incredibly coldly detached from humanity?
It actually points directly to a core tenet of behavioral analysis, which is the pragmatism of murder.
The pragmatism.
Yeah. We often conceptualize violence as this monolithic act of rage, but it is frequently highly compartmentalized.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the passive method, the sedation, the bleeding out, strongly suggests an offender who lacked the physical strength, size, or leverage to overpower the victim in a kinetic struggle.
So they couldn't just attack her directly.
Exactly. If an offender cannot manually strangulate or bludgeon a victim without risking a defensive fight, they have to level the playing field. Chemical sedation is the great equalizer.
So the gentle method wasn't born out of mercy at all. It was born out of a deficit in physical capability.
Correct. And the dismemberment, while viscerally horrific, wasn't necessarily an expression of uncontrolled rage or sadism.
It wasn't.
No, it was born out of a grim logistical necessity.
It's just to move the body.
Exactly. Consider the physics of a deceased human body. It is incredibly unwieldy.
Just dead weight?
Right. If a physically weaker offender commits a homicide inside a residential structure, how do they extract the remains?
Oh, I see.
How do they navigate stairs, hallways, or vehicle trunks without attracting attention or causing physical injury to themselves? They have to alter the mass and dimensions of the evidence. The dismemberment was cold, calculated logistics.
Man, the idea of a human body being reduced to a mere logistical problem is just deeply unsettling.
It's totally pragmatic.
So Barbier is sitting there with this contradictory profile, still lacking an identity for the torso, when his desk phone rings.
And this call introduces the first in a series of highly suspicious anonymous interventions.
Yeah, an anonymous woman tells Barbier she read the local reporting about the body and the blue bags. She suggests the victim might be a woman named Francois Gandrron, who resides at the Lavallee Violet apartment complex.
Out of nowhere.
Right. And before Barbier can even press her for a name, she just hangs up. Barbier immediately drives to the complex. He doesn't have a unit number, so he knocks on a random door.
Hoping for a lead.
Yeah, and the neighbor confirms Francois lives down the hall. But he also mentions, totally unprompted, that he hasn't seen her in days, and the cat has been crying endlessly.
Which is never a good sign.
No. Barbier goes to the door, hears the distressed cat, and basically calls for a forensics team to breach the apartment.
And what they find is fascinating. They enter a space that is essentially a static time capsule of the morning of December 12th.
Yeah, the living room is perfectly undisturbed. The bedroom features these unopened rolls of wallpaper just resting on a stool.
And the kitchen, of course.
The kitchen contains the shattered plate and the scattered food from Eve's outburst. But crucially, Barbier and the forensics team deploy presumptive blood tests throughout the apartment and find absolutely zero traces of blood. Nothing.
The absence of forensic evidence here, completely reorients the spatial timeline of the crime.
And while they're processing the scene, Barbier happens to glance out the window and spots a young man on the sidewalk staring up at the apartment looking really panicked.
What are the odds?
They lock eyes, and the man just speed walks away. Barbier orders him to halt. It's Eve Marta, the boyfriend.
The guy with the smashed plate.
Yep.
They bring him in, and he explains the entire sequence. You know, the morning argument on the 12th, the reconciliation dinner plan, the 8:00 p.m. phone call from the friend, the smashed plate, and retreating to his mother's house.
His story checks out.
It does. The police verify his alibi with his mother, and he is officially cleared.
But during his interview, Eve inadvertently hands them their next major lead.
By mentioning the handyman, right?
Exactly. Christian Marrow.
So on December 18th, Barbier knocks on Christian's door. Christian is super cooperative. He confirms he arrived at Francois' apartment at exactly 10:00 a.m. on the 12th.
And he paints a very specific picture of how she was doing.
Yeah, he states Francois answered the door wearing only a towel, having literally just stepped out of the bath. He said she seemed perfectly relaxed. He dropped off the wallpaper and departed within minutes.
And his alibi?
His alibi for the remainder of the day is heavily corroborated and rock solid.
So at this juncture, forensics successfully pull latent prints from Francois' home landline and finally match them to the severed hands recovered from the blue bags. So the identity is officially confirmed. Francois Gandrron.
They have cleared the boyfriend, they have cleared the handyman, and they have established a verified timeline.
But let's scrutinize this timeline for a second, because the window of opportunity is terrifyingly narrow.
It really is.
Christian sees Francois alive in her own apartment, wearing a towel at 10 a.m. The medical examiner places the time of death on that exact day. The killer must have arrived moments, perhaps minutes after the handyman departed.
Almost immediately.
I just struggle with the mechanics of this. How does an offender arrive at an apartment mid-morning, intercept a victim in a towel, commit a homicide, dismember the remains, and leave zero forensic trace in the victim's own home?
It defies physics. Unless, you recognize that the absence of blood is actually the most communicative piece of evidence they have.
How so?
Locard's exchange principle dictates that every contact leaves a trace.
Right, forensics 101.
Exactly. So the total lack of biological material unequivocally proves she was not murdered in her apartment. The offender lured her out.
But she was in a towel. She wasn't prepared to leave her house at all.
Right.
What psychological levers do you have to pull to get someone out the door in that state?
It requires an extraordinary foundational level of trust. Whoever knocked on that door right after the handyman was someone she knew intimately enough to allow inside while she was still getting dressed.
That narrows the pool of suspects significantly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Furthermore, to convince her to abandon her home mid-morning, likely canceling whatever plans she had for the day, and follow them to a secondary location requires immense influence.
You definitely do not do that for a stranger.
No, you don't do that for a casual acquaintance either. You only do that for a fixture in your life.
The vulnerability of intimacy again.
Precisely.
But Barbier realizes the killer is deeply embedded in Francois' inner circle. And almost on cue, the precinct phone rings again. Another anonymous tip, pointing the investigation in a radically different direction.
And this is where the offender really attempts to construct a labyrinth of situational framing.
Barbier takes the call. It's a woman's voice, claiming to be a close friend of Francois. She alleges that Francois had recently uncovered this massive criminal secret.
A huge pivot in the narrative.
Yeah, she says Michelle and Luc, the two men from the nightclub, were secretly operating a drug trafficking and stolen vehicle syndicate out of their discount store.
This introduces a highly cinematic, organized crime motive into what is actually a domestic case.
And the caller provides a devastatingly specific detail. She claims Michelle and Luc threatened Francois to ensure her silence.
What was the threat?
The specific threat. They told her they were going to drug her, bleed her out, dismember her body, and hide her head so she could never be identified.
A threat that perfectly mirrors the undisclosed autopsy findings.
Perfectly.
That level of correlation should immediately trigger alarms for any seasoned investigator.
So on December 20th, a week after the bags were discovered, Barbier orchestrates an ambush. He descends on the discount store owned by Michelle and Luc, catching them unloading a freight truck.
They bring them in right away.
Yeah, they are separated into different interrogation rooms. Luc adopts a standard defensive posture, basically stonewalling the detectives and denying he even knows the social circle.
Typical response.
But Barbier takes Michelle's interrogation. He asks Michelle if he's heard about the remains found at the hospital. Michelle casually says yes, and even makes a crass joke about a surgeon slipping with a scalpel.
He's totally unbothered.
Right. Barbier remains silent, then just slides a folder across the table containing the unreleased graphic crime scene photographs of the torso and limbs.
It's a tactical deployment of shock value.
Designed to bypass cognitive defenses.
Exactly.
So Michel turns ashen. He doesn't recognize the torso. Then Barbier delivers the strike. He says, "The remains belong to Francois Gandrron. Did you kill her?"
And Michel's reaction is huge.
It is instantaneous and explosive. He recoils, shouts in denial, calls Barbier insane, and repeatedly states what a great friend Francois was. He exhibits this genuine, visceral devastation.
This interrogation is a pivotal psychological sorting mechanism.
Because the story from the tip was too good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The anonymous caller's narrative about the drug traffickers was incredibly specific. It flawlessly aligned with the highly confidential details of the autopsy. The sedation, the exsanguination, the missing skull.
It's almost too accurate. I liken it to a student cheating on a calculus exam by copying the exact wrong workings of the person next to them stroke for stroke.
It's a perfect analogy.
You do not arbitrarily guess the precise methodology of a chemical sedation and exsanguination. The killer tried to construct the perfect frame job, but did they basically outsmart themselves by making the lie too structurally sound?
Precisely. The offender attempted to leverage a gritty, believable criminal archetype, drug traffickers, silencing a liability.
Right.
But they possessed intimate, factual knowledge, the exact murder method, and they couldn't resist using that knowledge to lend credibility to their anonymous tip.
They wanted to prove they knew what they were talking about.
Yeah. They wanted the police to hear the tip, compare it to the autopsy, and conclude the men must be guilty because the details match so perfectly.
But the perfection of the lie proved the tipster was actually the architect of the crime.
And Barbier's read on Michel in that room confirmed it. Genuine sudden grief over the violent death of a friend is an involuntary physiological response.
You can't fake it.
No. A guilty person staring at photographs of their own handiwork might feign sadness or become aggressively defensive, but pure, unadulterated horror is nearly impossible to synthesize.
So Barbier recognized Michel's innocence, which meant the tipster was lying about the motive, but telling the absolute truth about the method.
So Barbier realizes he doesn't need to investigate a drug cartel. He needs to investigate the origin of the rumor.
Right. He needs to find out who in Francois' social circle is actively seeding this specific gruesome narrative. And that strategic pivot leads him directly to the weakest link in the offender's chain of deception.
Enter Sylvie Rivero.
The introverted, heavily enmeshed best friend from the nightclub incident.
Barbier brings Sylvie in for questioning simply because she is a node in this social network.
He casually asks her about Michel and Luc. Sylvie sits in the chair and recites the exact same narrative. She claims she was terrified of the men, alleges they were trafficking narcotics, and repeats and Yvette provided the police with one additional fatal piece of intelligence. Something Sylvie never intended to become public knowledge.
This is the turning point.
A few days following the murder, Yvette's daughter had paid a casual visit to Sylvie's residence. During the visit, the daughter utilized the guest bathroom. When she flushed the toilet, she observed two gleaming solid gold dental crowns resting in the bowl.
Just sitting there.
Both Yvette and her daughter were intimately aware that Francois possessed highly distinctive gold dental crowns.
This is the critical failure point where the entire architecture of the crime just collapses.
Let's examine the absurdity of this disposal method. Of all the ways to eradicate physical evidence post-homicide, why attempt to flush solid gold down a residential toilet?
It's baffling.
It strikes me as an act of profound desperation, but also a fundamental misunderstanding of basic physics.
It is an intersection of panic and ignorance. Let's analyze the post-offense behavior. Sylvie successfully transported and discarded the torso and limbs in a highly visible public space.
Which worked, initially.
Right. But she retained the head. Why? Because the cranium and dentition are the primary vectors for forensic identification. Without them, Jane Does remain unnamed.
So she recognized the necessity of destroying the skull to protect her anonymity.
Yes, but effectively destroying a human skull and dentition within the confines of a standard residential property is a near impossibility without industrial equipment.
Bone is tough.
Bone is remarkably resilient. And gold. Gold is one of the most durable, non-corrosive noble metals on the periodic table.
Right.
It will not incinerate in a standard fireplace. It will not dissolve in household bleach or acid.
So she's stuck with it.
Sylvie likely managed to dismantle the softer tissues, and the Jabo and historical sources actually suggest she deposited fragments in a local river. But the gold crowns remained completely pristine.
Wow.
Realizing she harbored indestructible forensic evidence within her home, panic overrides logic. She attempts the most rudimentary disposal method available, the municipal sewer system.
But gold is incredibly dense. It simply sank into the P-trap of the plumbing, and the hydraulic pressure of subsequent flushes just pushed it back up into the visible bowl.
The crowns are a testament to the fact that despite her meticulous planning regarding the sedation and the frame job, she lacked the technical capability to truly erase Francois' identity.
The very elements she could not destroy became the anchor tethering the homicide directly to her residence.
Exactly.
Armed with the testimony regarding the gold crowns, the police secure a search warrant for Sylvie's home. The facade is finally breached, and the horrifying step-by-step chronology of December 12th is finally laid bare in the interrogation room.
This is where we dissect the anatomy of the betrayal, moving from the psychological motives to the physical execution.
Forensic teams sweep Sylvie's house. Using luminol, they detect microscopic traces of blood in the bathroom that survived her cleanup efforts.
She missed a spot.
More devastatingly, they uncover a hidden lockbox containing Francois' personal jewelry, the exact pieces she was wearing on the morning she vanished.
Damning evidence.
Confronted with the blood evidence, the jewelry, Yvette's testimony, and the gold crowns, Sylvie's introverted facade shatters. She breaks down and delivers a full confession.
And within that confession, the why and the how finally align.
Yeah, the modal stems directly from our earlier discussion regarding enmeshment. Sylvie articulated an intense, all-consuming jealousy.
She coveted Francois' newly reclaimed happiness.
Yeah, her social mobility and specifically the romantic attention she garnered from men. The suffocating proximity of their post-divorce relationship had mutated into pure, unadulterated hatred.
Sylvie basically perceived Francois' vibrant life as a constant mocking reminder of her own isolation.
Which is the darkest manifestation of dependency.
When an individual relies entirely on a single node for their social existence, and that node threatens to disconnect, as Francois did by leaving the nightclub, the dependent party doesn't merely feel abandoned.
They feel existentially threatened.
Exactly. For Sylvie, destroying Francois was the ultimate mechanism to seize control over the entity that dictated her reality.
So here's the execution of that control. The timeline of December 12th. At approximately 10:00 a.m., shortly after Christian Morrow, the handyman, departs, there is a knock on Francois' door.
It's Sylvie.
Francois, still wrapped in a towel fresh from the bath, opens the door. Because it is her lifelong confidant, she admits her without hesitation. Sylvie projects a completely benign facade. No residual anger from the nightclub, just casual, friendly, morning banter.
She leverages the extensive history of their friendship as a skeleton key to bypass every single one of Francois' natural threat detection systems.
After chatting, Sylvie casually mentions she has, quote-unquote, something to show her back at her residence, which is only a short walk away. She easily convinces Francois to throw on some clothes and accompany her, just for a few minutes.
And Francois complies.
They walk to Sylvie's house. Upon arrival, Sylvie suggests making a pot of tea before unveiling the surprise.
And this transition to the kitchen is the pivot point from friendship to premeditated murder.
While out of sight in the kitchen, Sylvie crushes a massive, lethal quantity of anti-anxiety medication. She deposits the powder into the bottom of Francois' teacup, pours the hot tea to dissolve it, and brings the cups out to the table.
And then they just sit.
Best friends since childhood, sitting across from one another. Sylvie sips her own tea, maintaining eye contact, engaging in small talk, while she watches Francois consume an entire cup of liquid poison.
The psychological fortitude, or rather the sociopathic dissociation, required to sit across from someone you have known your entire life and watch them ingest a lethal substance while smiling at them is just staggering.
It is a terrifying subversion of comfort. Sylvie utilized the trust built over decades to navigate Francois into that house, into that chair, and eventually into that bathtub without triggering a single defensive instinct.
There were no bruises.
No defensive wounds on the forearms at all. The weapon wasn't a firearm or a blade or a blunt instrument. The weapon was a cup of tea prepared by a trusted friend.
It reinforces the horrific pragmatism we discussed earlier. Sylvie knew she could not overpower Francois kinetically, so she weaponized her intimate knowledge of her friend's daily rhythms.
She knew Francois enjoyed tea.
She knew Francois would accept a beverage in her home without suspicion. tea is aromatic and slightly bitter, perfectly masking the taste of crushed pharmaceuticals.
So she just waited for it to work.
She simply waited for the pharmacology to take effect, watching Francois become lethargic, then unresponsive.
Once Francois is heavily sedated and entirely incapacitated, the logistics begin. Sylvie lifts her friend, carries her into the bathroom, and places her into the dry bathtub. She turns on the faucet and waits for the water to rise.
Just waiting.
And then she simply holds Francois's head beneath the surface until she drowns. No struggle, no frantic splashing, just the quiet, methodical execution of a lifelong companion.
The transition from the emotional, jealous friend to the ice-cold tactician is absolute in this moment.
Sylvie drains the water from the tub. To ensure the process is irreversible, she takes a blade and inflicts the deep gashes on the wrists, allowing the exsanguination to flow directly down the drain, minimizing the environmental blood spatter.
Very calculated.
Then the dismemberment phase begins. She sections the remains, packages the torso and limbs into the blue hospital trash bags, and transports them to the Trousseau Hospital parking lot.
Calculating that the high volume of medical traffic would camouflage the bags.
But as we analyzed, her methodology contained catastrophic flaws.
She retains the head to thwart identification.
She attempts to flush the indestructible gold crowns and disposes of the cranial fragments in the river. But her most monumental, fatal error. When she packaged the limbs, she included Francois's hands in the blue bags.
That single oversight permitted the forensics team to pull latent fingerprints and confirm the identity.
If she had severed the hands and disposed of them with the skull, Barbier might never have identified the torso, and the anonymous tips would have pointed to a nameless ghost.
It perfectly illustrates the duality of Sylvie Rivero.
She possessed the tactical acumen to meticulously plan a poisoning, a drowning, a dismemberment, and a complex situational frame job involving organized crime.
But fundamentally, she was an amateur.
She forgot the forensic value of hands, and she failed to understand the specific gravity of gold.
Sylvie Rivero was formally charged with Francois's murder on December 21st, 1988, merely a week after the horrific discovery in the hospital parking lot.
But the judicial process was protracted.
It took 3 years for the case to reach a verdict.
During that interval, psychiatric evaluations and legal maneuvering dominated the proceedings. The defense likely explored avenues of temporary insanity or a crime of passion, but the premeditation inherent in crushing the pills and orchestrating the anonymous tips proved insurmountable.
3 years later, she was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison.
A life sentence predicated entirely on the pathological inability to allow a friend to exist independently.
Let's synthesize the incredible, tragic trajectory of this investigation for a second.
We initiated this deep dive with a seemingly mundane social friction at a nightclub between an extrovert and an introvert.
And that minor fracture cascaded into a grisly discovery in a hospital parking lot, thrusting investigators into a labyrinth of false domestic crime scenes, statistically perfect but innocent boyfriends, and elaborate fabrications regarding drug cartels.
Only to systematically dismantle those illusions and arrive at the devastating truth that the danger was not lurking in the criminal underworld or in the shadows of the city.
The most profound, unsettling realization is that the person who held Francois's hand in life, the person she trusted implicitly enough to sit and drink tea with, was the exact same individual who severed that hand in death.
It demands a complete recalibration of how we perceive trust and proximity.
It really does.
Which leads me to a final lingering thought that I want you, the listener, to carry with you long after this deep dive concludes.
What is it?
Consider the architecture of vulnerability. We expend an enormous amount of societal energy guarding against external threats. We install security systems. We lock our deadbolts. We remain hyper-vigilant of strangers in our periphery.
Always looking outward.
Exactly. But the most lethal individuals in our lives might be the ones who already possess a key to our front door. The very intimacy that constructs a beautiful relationship, understanding someone's daily routines, their specific fears, their trusting nature, is exactly the intelligence required to construct a flawless blueprint for their destruction.
Because to betray someone with absolute perfection, to lure them into a trap without triggering a single alarm, you first must know them completely.
The ultimate subversion of closeness. So the next time you find yourself relaxing at a friend's house, feeling perfectly secure and comfortable, perhaps just remember, sometimes the most glaring evidence of a shattered reality is just resting quietly in the porcelain, waiting to be discovered.